local political analyst and a journalism expert react to the defamation case settlement reached by Fox News with Dominion Voting Systems for $787 million.
As David Jones reports, experts say they're disappointed the case won't go to trial.
We can disagree about politics. That's fine. We've always done that since the country's been founded. We cannot disagree about basic facts.
Fox News paid handsomely to settle a defamation lawsuit brought by Dominion Voting Systems.
I think a lot of people who are interested in media law and First Amendment law are a little disappointed maybe that it's not going to trial.
I think it's going to change the media landscape.
In its $1.6 billion lawsuit, Dominion sought to prove Fox News acted with malice or reckless disregard for the truth when it spread the lie from former President Donald Trump and his allies that the 2020 presidential election was tampered with using Dominion voting machines.
You do not have the right to accuse someone of voter fraud unless you can actually produce irrefutable evidence that voter fraud actually happened. They are basically fabricating a different set of facts that don't exist in reality. And that's very destructive for our political system.
In a statement, Fox News said, quote, "We acknowledge the court's rulings finding certain claims about Dominion to be false. This settlement reflects Fox's continued commitment to the highest journalistic standards. We are hopeful that our decision to resolve this dispute with Dominion amicably instead of the acrimony of a divisive trial allows the country to move forward from these issues."
That's surprising to me because Fox News said from the beginning, this is how we're reporting the story.
Loyola journalism professor Lisa Collins says the network's statement contradicts its prior stance, but acknowledges the harm its coverage caused both to Dominion and the country's political discourse.
Fox News picked a lane, and there are filings that show, court filings that show that reporters and producers and some talent were not in full agreement with this kind of presentation that Fox News was airing.
Dillard University political analyst Robert Collins says he understands the settlement decision, but thinks scuttling the trial deprives the public of important information.
It wasn't so much the money. I think Fox News knew that their reputation would be harmed by putting these commentators on air, and then those commentators basically admitting that yes, you know, we allowed people that we knew that were lying on the air.
The network still faces another defamation lawsuit from a separate voting technology company, Smartmatic.